Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Created for Christ's Word with me, your speaker, Langston Bartley. It's been a while, but I'm finally back. It's been real busy, but I'm back with our series, Young and Mighty, and the podcast Created for Christ's Word. Last time we finished the story of Joseph, and we ended his story. Now we are going to start on a new character and her story. The next biblical person we are going to talk about is a girl named Esther. And Esther is special. She's very special because Esther was a queen. The story of Esther is a powerful message. We can learn so much from Esther, and we will as we begin this lesson in the next few episodes. So let's go ahead and begin our lesson on Esther. Let me give you a little background on Esther. Esther was a girl who was most likely a young teen. She had grown up an orphan. Her mother and father died when she was young. She had a close cousin by the name of Mordecai. Mordecai was her older cousin. And when her parents died, Mordecai took her in. Mordecai treated her cousin Esther as if she was his own daughter. He cared for her all her life. Esther was a Jew who lived in the city of Persia. Persia was a great and powerful nation. It was one of the most powerful nations known in the Bible that we can read. She lived during an era of Israel's history where the people of God were in exile, the Israelites for their disobedience. The Israelites were exiled because they disobeyed God, and because of their disobedience, they were conquered. Before the Persians, they were conquered by the Babylonian Empire. By the nation of Babylon. But the nation of Babylon's King Nebuchadnezzar, conquered all of Israel and destroyed Jerusalem, the capital city of Israel. The prophet Jeremiah prophesied that the Babylonian Empire would conquer Israel and destroy Jerusalem, but the people were ignorant and they refused to listen. When Nebuchadnezzar died, his nephew Belshazzar became king. However, not for a long time, though. The Persians came and invaded the same people that invaded Israel. And they conquered the Babylonians, and their king, King Darius, took over Israel. And then after King Darius died, a few other kings passed, and a new king took over. And his name was King Xerxes. He has another name, but we'll just call him King Xerxes. King Xerxes was and let me tell you a little bit about him and what happened before we meet Esther. This happens before we meet Esther, and it's important because it goes with Esther's story. So King Xerxes was a strong and powerful king. He was married to a woman, his wife and Queen Vashti. One day, King Xerxes had a feast with his officials, servants, his nobles, and the princes of the provinces of Persia. The king eventually got drunk during his party from the wine he had, and he began to show the people his riches and all that he owned. His feast he had lasted 7 days. Back then in the Bible, feasts and certain things would last longer than a day. It would last more than a day. And it would, things such as weddings, sometimes weddings back then would last a week. Queen Vashti also hosted a feast for the women in the royal palace. At the same time, King Xerxes had his feast. While the king was drunk and feasting, and Vashti was at her feast, King Xerxes told his eunuchs to bring the queen to him in his drunkenness so he may impress his guests. So he told his servants to bring the queen to him in his drunkenness so he could toy around and impress his guests and use her. However, Queen Vashti refused to come to him in his drunken state. Hearing that his wife would not come to him because she didn't want to be allowed to just be toyed around with. She didn't just want to be played around with. And this made the king angry. It made him pissed off. And he was filled with rage. The king asked his wise men and princes, What should he do to Queen Vashti according to the law for her disobedience to the king? One of the princes, his name was Memucan, in Esther chapter 1, verse 16 through 22. Here's what he suggested by the law. Memucan answered the king and his nobles, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn what Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. So if it please the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and Medes, those were some of the people in the nation, that cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. The king and his nobles thought this made good sense, so he followed Memucan's counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. King Xerxes, so basically Memucan, this prince, one of the princes, this finds out, gives the king the idea that he should banish Queen Vashti from the kingdom forever and from the king's sight, and that they should make out a law that he should bring all the young girls that are single and decide who would be his new queen. And King Xerxes was pleased with Prince Memucan's request. And following the request he made, he decreed a law. He banished Queen Vashti from the kingdom and stripped her title as queen. After his anger cooled, he remembered what Vashti did and what he did by banishing her. Then his personal attendant suggested, like I said in Esther 2:2-4, this. So his personal attendant suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, will see that they are given all given beauty treatments. After that, the young woman who pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. Basically, the king decreed that every young single woman in Persia to be taken to the palace and determine who will be the next queen to take Vashti's place. As a result of the king's decree, Esther was taken to the palace along with the other young women. Before she left, Mordecai, her older cousin, gave her specific instructions. He told her not to reveal her nationality as a Jew. He told her to keep it a secret. While she was at the palace, a man named Haggai, she met a man named Haggai. Haggai's job was to prepare the young women to go before the king when he made his decision. He gave each of the young women beauty treatments to impress the king. He saw all the beautiful women, but specifically Esther stood out to him the most. Haggai noticed and was impressed with how Esther treated the people around her. He treated her with kindness and care. During her time in the palace, Mordecai every day would take a walk near the courtyard of the palace to check on Esther and see how she is doing. Esther cared for Mordecai. He wanted her to make sure that she was safe during her time in the palace. Mordecai always looked out for his young cousin's well-being. Months came by, and the time came for the young girls to go before the king, and the king would make his decision on who he would choose to be his queen. When the time came for Esther to go show herself to King Xerxes, the king had seen a few other young women that were beautiful. None of them were pleasing to him, though. However, when he got to Esther, she stood out to him. He was fascinated by her beauty. He saw her more beautiful than the other women who appeared before him. The moment he saw Esther, Xerxes instantly fell in love with her. He fell in love with Esther. He eventually made his decision. King Xerxes decided to make Esther his queen. Esther was no longer just Esther. Now she goes by Queen Esther. So Xerxes chose Esther to be his queen out of all the other women. There are many things we can learn about him choosing Esther. So let's see what we can learn from this story in our 2 points. That was the story. So now let's go to our points. Here's the 2 points. Number 1, it is always important how you show up to something because you represent something. The Bible says that Esther was a beautiful young girl. Now, there were other beautiful women, but specifically, Esther was beautiful on the inside and outside. I mentioned when we were talking about David that David was handsome on the inside and outside. He was clean inside and out. And many people are clean on the inside, are clean on the outside, but they're not clean on the inside. And basically, Esther could have come to the king any kind of way. She could have come raggedy and just looking like who knows whatever. However, Esther always showed up to something the right way. As young Christians, we represent the kingdom. So when people see us, they ought to see Christ through us, physically and spiritually, inside and outside. We can't represent Christ and just looking any kind of way. We also can't represent Christ by looking good on the outside, but then we're not spiritually moral. So we can't represent Christ one without the other. We have to have both. We represent the kingdom. And lastly, number 2, sometimes we are put into situations that we didn't put ourselves into. But we have to accept it and understand God put us in these situations for a reason. We will see more of this in the next episode. This is very important because we'll see a lot of this in the next episode. But we see that the king chose Esther. Esther didn't ask to be a queen. She didn't ask to be taken away from her home and put into this big palace. She probably was already living a good life already. It must have been very uncomfortable for her to be queen. However, she had to accept that maybe she was chosen to be queen for a certain reason. Little did she know that God chose her to be a queen to demonstrate his glory and power, and God chose her for greatness. You might have not asked to be in a certain situation in this life. You may not have been asked to be put in a situation that involves a divorce between parents, adoption, or even neglect. But I promise you, God may have put you in this situation for a reason. Good or bad, it just might be to give him the glory. Thank you for listening to this Creative for Christ's Work podcast. Please be sure to like and share with others. This has been Langston Bartley, your podcast speaker. I'll see you later. Bye.